Here we are looking at the weight of glory. I'm going to be doing, this was an ambitious thing for me to do, to walk you through this sermon in 2 sessions like this. But I hope it came across last week pretty well. It's complex stuff. He brings us into a lot of depth that we have to reflect on. Imagine sitting hearing this as a sermon the first time. You would just go right over your head. Ooh, what was that? But there's so much to it. But here we have it right in front of us, and so we're going to be walking through it together. So as it was preached originally as a sermon in the Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Oxford, and as I told you last week, I know this church because it was across the street from my college, Oriel College, across the high street, and here's a kind of an image of it. Beautiful building, and this is what it looks like, and it's pretty identical to what it looked like when Lewis was giving the sermon from the pulpit. So it's kind of fascinating to imagine what would have been like to have heard this when you first went through it. So I went through the first portion of this material here, and this is a PDF I got online. And you can get this PDF very easily by just looking it up and getting a PDF Weight of Glory, and this is what I'm using. So I planned to get up to this point and did. So now I'm going to do the second half. So that's it. Not much, but there's a lot. So I'm going to open it up here, and we're going to walk through it together, and we're going to see this concept here. And he's been talking about the fundamental things he's been mentioning before I go into this, though, is this: our desires are too little. We don't want enough. We actually settle ourselves for trivial things in comparison with what God has got for us. And in fact, as he puts it here, if a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious. If you desire something above anything else that's not infinity and eternity, it's not enough. You were meant for more than that, and we don't want enough. That's what he's saying. We're half-hearted creatures fooling about with money, drink, and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child in a slum who's willing to go on making mud pies because he cannot imagine what is meant by an offer of a holiday at the sea. We're too easily pleased. We set ourselves really, and we missed out on what God wants for us if we settle on something less than infinity and eternity, because as Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and what is he going to say? Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. So nothing less than infinity and eternity is big enough. So when I ask the question, what do you seek? That Jesus' first question to myself, that I may know you more clearly, is my answer, because I can't think of a better thing than to know the infinite and personal and eternal one than that. So this is a major theme, but we must realize that the best joys of this world are not the things in itself. We have been given hints of glory, but they're like dumb idols if we fall in love with them. So they are pointers to something beyond what we can attain. So we have to recognize that we can only have a limited imagination, what I call caterpillar imaginations, because you're a caterpillar and there's a butterfly coming. And there is one right now. There is one who's been raised from the dead, and you're going to be made like him. And so imagine it is a caterpillar and a butterfly. You look at the two. But it is the same DNA, it's just a different body plan, but radically different. But what a transformation that takes place. So imagine seeing each other as you will be, a society of glory. And we're going to be, this is what he's going to be, where he's going to be heading with that. And so he says, we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. So this is my way of summarizing where we've been. And so now we go into this idea of glory. And when he talks about various images of heaven, he mentioned several, and one of them was this image of glory. But what does that mean for most people? You can't get away from that. It's constantly associated with psalms and with palms and crowns and white robes, thrones and splendor, like the sun and the stars. This makes no immediate appeal to me at all, he says. And in that respect, I fancy I'm a typical modern. Glory suggests two ideas to me, of which one seems wicked and the other ridiculous. Either glory means to me fame, or it means luminosity. You see, because look at the fame and the whole approach to the idea of being focused on the individual self. As for the first, since to be famous means to be better known than other people, the desire for fame appears to me to be a competitive passion, and therefore of hell rather than of heaven. As for the second, who wishes to become a kind of a living electric light bulb? And so he looks at that, and that kind of puts him aside, puts him off. But he says, I began to look into this. I was shocked to find others who were writing about this, Milton, Johnson, Aquinas. They took heavenly glory, quite frankly, in the sense of fame or good report. Now, Lewis had an incredible mind, but I think it was like an eidetic memory, because whatever book he read, he seemed to remember. He's one of those people I would love to. I'd be a dangerous man if I could do what he did. But he could remember a book and even where it was and so forth like that. And so all he had to do was summon up these books, and he'd remember what they said. The frame of good report. But not fame conferred by our fellow creatures, fame with God, approval, or I might say, appreciation by God. And then when I had thought it over, I saw that this view was scriptural. Nothing can eliminate from the parable the divine accolade. What is it? Well done, thou good and faithful servant. There's something going on here about fame with God in that sense of an accolade. With that, a good deal of what I had been thinking all my life fell down like a house of cards. I suddenly remembered that no one can enter heaven except as a child. And nothing is so obvious in a child, not in a conceited child, but in a good child, as its great and undisguised pleasure at being praised. Let's think about that. We're wired for that, and we're wired to hear the well done from our Father. And so many people never got that blessing in this life, but there's a need for us to be reparented, as it were, by the living God, who is the one that we were meant and designed to please. And in finding our pleasure in him, we find our true pleasure in everything else. Not only in a child either, but even in a dog or a horse. And I'm always marveling at how certain pets just constantly follow and looking for the accolades and the pleasure of the relationship that you have there. And you can see that as an obvious example. Apparently what had mistaken for humility had all these years prevented me from understanding what is in fact the humblest, the most childlike, the most creaturely of pleasures, nay, the specific pleasure of the inferior, the pleasure of a beast before men, a child before its father, a pupil before its teacher, a creature before its creator. I'm not forgetting how horribly this most innocent desire is parodied in our human ambitions, or how quickly, in my own experience, the lawful pleasure of praise from those whom it was my duty to please turns into the deadly poison of self-admiration. We can easily turn it from that. I am pretty good now, aren't I? And you begin to get mindful of yourself and begin to think about an inflated view of yourself. But I thought I could detect a moment, a very, very short moment, before this happened, and here's what he's focusing on, during which the satisfaction of having pleased those whom I rightly loved and rightly feared was pure. And I think we've all know what he's talking about. There have been times when you've been touched by something and you recognize it was enough. It's enough to raise our thoughts to what may happen when the redeemed soul, beyond all hope and nearly beyond belief, learns at last that she has pleased him whom she was created to please. That's why I think one of the key components here, that you were meant to please him. How can you be an ingredient in the divine pleasure? It's a strange thought, isn't it, when you consider that? But there's going to be no room for vanity. She'll be free from the miserable illusion that it is her doing. With no taint of what we should now call self-approval, she will most innocently rejoice in the thing that God made her to be. And the moment which heals her old inferiority complex forever will also be drown her pride deeper than Prospero's books, and looking at Shakespeare's Tempest and the magic book that seduced him into these illusions. Perfect humility dispenses with modesty. If God is satisfied with the work may be satisfied with itself. It's not for her to bandy compliments with her sovereign. I can imagine someone saying that he dislikes my idea of heaven as a place where we are patted on the back. And it might seem that way, but here's where he's going. It's an understanding that it's behind it that I dislike. In the end, and here's one of the key themes in his writing. In the end, that face, which is the delight or the terror of the universe, must be turned upon each of us, either with one expression or with the other, either conferring glory inexpressible or inflicting shame that can never be cured or disguised. Do you hear that? That's a very critical thought. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to matter most. Think about your time when you stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And the greatest words you can possibly hear are what? Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. And the worst words one could ever hear are going to be uttered by the same person. Depart from me, I never knew you. So the worst words you could ever conceive of and the greatest words you could ever conceive of are going to be both uttered by our Lord Jesus. And we want to live in such a way that we hear, well done, enter into the joy of your master. Salvation, as we know, is a free gift of God, so that getting into heaven is not by works, but by grace through faith in Christ. We know that. But reward in the kingdom of heaven is based on faithfulness to opportunity. And so Jesus speaks, as he says here, unblushingly about promises of reward. So you cannot think of that as mercenary, because Jesus teaches us to actually pursue something that will not let you down in the end, to make sure that you have a treasure, a portfolio in heaven that's going to be worthwhile. If it's all burned away, the wood, hay, and stubble is all burned away, but the wood, that which is gold, silver, and precious things, that will last, that will endure, that will be enriched. And so if anything is there that's built upon the superstructure, the foundation being Christ, then he will receive a reward. I think but if it's all burned away, he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. There are some, I think, who say you may enter in. But others are going to be hear well done. And I want to live to hear the well done. I think it's a desire that you should have to be pleasing to the one you were meant to please, is what I'm arguing here. And so I read in the periodical the other day that the fundamental thing is how we think about God. By God himself, it's not. How God thinks of us is not only more important, but infinitely more important. Indeed, how we think of him is of no importance, except insofar as it's related to how he thinks of us. Do you hear that? So allow him to be the one who defines everything else. And then your response is that of one who, beyond all possibility and all desert, realizes that you are the object of the divine love. And that there's nothing in us that could have merited it or warranted it, but there it is. It is a grace that he's given us because he's adopted us and chosen us. It's written that we shall stand before him, he shall appear, shall be inspected. This will be true. The promise of glory is the promise. Almost incredible and only possible by the work of Christ. That any of us who really chooses shall actually survive that examination, shall find approval, shall please God. So this is why I speak of having 2 days in your calendar, today and that day, this day in light of the judgment seat of Christ. Because you do not know what day it will be where you will stand before him. And it could be this very day. Never presume that it won't be. Wisdom tells us to live as if this was your last day on earth. And to live each day as such, as a mini life. Because living is so daily. That's why he's apportioned it to us. It's a mini life, as we know. And as a consequence, live this day in light of that day so that I will hear, and in such a way that I want to hear the well done. And so he says, to please God, to be a real ingredient in the divine happiness, to be loved by God, not merely pitied, but delighted in, as an artist delights in the work of a father in a son. It seems impossible, a weight or a burden of glory which our thoughts can hardly sustain, but so it is. How can you be an ingredient of the love of God? How is it possible that God has loved us so much that he actually gave his son for us, you see, so that you are of boundless worth? Again, it's not that you are worthy. The word is not worthless, it's unworthy, again. So we are not worthless. We have great worth because he assigned it to us. We are unworthy, But that's why I've said before, the doctrines of grace humble us without inflating us, without degrading us, rather, and elevate us without inflating us. So you're both humbled and elevated at the same time. And so it's the realization that all of life is gift and grace. Everything you have is all a gift of grace. So the idea of being a pleasure, of being delighted in. Notice what's happening. If I had rejected the authoritative and scriptural image of glory and stuck obstinately to the vague desire, which was at the outset my only pointer to heaven, I could have seen no connection at all between that desire and the Christian promise. But now, having followed up what seemed puzzling and repellent in the sacred books, I find to my great surprise, looking back, that the connection is perfectly clear. Glory, as Christianity teaches me to hope for, turns out to satisfy my original desire and indeed to reveal an element in that desire which I had not noticed. By ceasing for a moment to consider my own wants, I've begun to learn better what I really wanted. When I attempted a few moments ago to describe our spiritual longings, I was omitting one of their most curious characteristics. We usually notice it just as the moment of vision dies away, as the music ends or the landscape loses the celestial light. What we feel then has been well described by Keats as the journey homeward toward habitual self. You know what I mean. For a few moments, we've had the illusion of belonging to that world. Now we wake to find there's no such thing. We've been mere spectators. Beauty has smiled, but not to welcome us. Her face was turned in our direction, but not to see us. We have not been accepted, welcomed, or taken into the dance. We may go when we please. We may stay if we can. Nobody marks us. A scientist may reply that since most of the things we call beautiful are inanimate, it's not very surprising that they take no notice of us. That, of course, is true. It is not the physical objects that I'm speaking of, but that indescribable something of which they have become for a moment the messengers. And part of the bitterness which mixes with the sweetness of that message is due to the fact that it so seldom seems to be a message intended for us, but rather something we have overheard. By bitterness, I mean pain, not resentment. We should hardly dare to ask that any notice be taken of ourselves, but we pine. The sense that in this universe we are treated as strangers, the longing to be acknowledged, to meet with some response, to bridge some chasm that yawns between us and reality is part of our inconsolable secret. And this is where he tightens this into a clear understanding of this desire that's really in all of us. Surely from this point of view, the promise of glory in the sense described becomes highly relevant to our deep desire. And here's his point. For glory meant good report with God, acceptance by God, response, acknowledgement, and welcome into the heart of all things. The door in which we've been knocking all our lives will open at last. And that's a wonderful thought. That we want so much something that's so rich, so profound, so great, that only God can make it happen, and that his promise is, in fact, because he's pursued us, wooed us, purchased us, and preceded us, that this is going to be so. Our heart's response then to his initiative of love is to receive that love, and the door in which I've been knocking will open at last. Perhaps it seems rather crude to describe glory as the fact of being noticed by God, but this is almost the language of the New Testament. St. Paul promises to those who love God not that as we should expect that they will know him, but that they will be known by him. It's a strange promise. Does not God know all things at all times? But it is dreadfully re-echoed in another passage of the New Testament. There we are warned that it may happen to any one of us to appear at last before the face of God and hear only the appalling words, I never knew you, depart from me. In some senses, dark to the intellect as it's unendurable to the feelings, we can both be banished from the presence of him who is present everywhere and erased from the knowledge of him who knows all. We can be left utterly and absolutely outside, repelled, exiled, estranged, finally and unspeakably ignored. Or on the other hand, we can be called in, welcomed, received, acknowledged. We must walk every day on the razor edge between these two incredible possibilities. Apparently then our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door, which we've always been seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but it's the truest index of our real situation. To be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honor beyond all our merits, and also the healing of that old ache. And so it's the idea of being summoned into that glory, into that presence, that longing that we have. And that's the other sense of glory as brightness, splendor, luminosity. We are to shine as the sun. We are to be given the morning star. I begin to think, I see what it means. In one way, or of course, God has given us the morning star already. You can go and enjoy the gift on many fine mornings if you get up early enough. But what more, you may ask, do we want? We want so much more, something the books on aesthetics take little notice of. The poets and the mythologies know all about it. We do not want merely to see beauty, though God knows that is bounty enough. We want something else which can hardly be put into words, to be united with the beauty we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it. You see what he's talking about here? There are times when I look at the beauty of the created order and I want to be a part of it and be absorbed into that, but without losing my identity. It's a strange longing. We've peopled air and earth and water with gods and goddesses and nymphs and elves and so forth. And he speaks about these poets talk about these as lovely falsehoods. But they tell us of beauty born of murmuring sound will pass into a human face, but it won't. Not yet. If we take the image of Scripture seriously, if we believe that God will one day give us the morning star and cause us to put on the splendor of the sun, then we may surmise that both the ancient myths and the modern poetry, so false as history, may be very near the truth as prophecy. At present, we are on the outside of the world or the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see, but all the leaves of the New Testament are mingling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in, and that's what I'm longing for, the idea of all this longing, this desire that I have for something more than I can touch. Every so often, you get a hint of longing, of desire that you cannot explain, but one day it's going to be so. When human souls have become as perfect in voluntary obedience as the inanimate creation in its lifeless obedience, because you notice everything obeys God except us in the created order. You see, fallen order, fallen world, yes, but even there, you just are marvel at how that is. We're the ones who rebel. But nature is only this first sketch, for you must not think that I'm putting forward any heathen fancy of being absorbed into nature. That's more of an Eastern concept. Nature is mortal. We shall outlive her. This is an amazing thought. When all the suns and nebulae have passed away, each one of you will still be alive. Nature is only the image, the symbol. But it is the symbol Scripture invites us to use. We are summoned to pass in through nature, beyond her, into that splendor which she fitfully reflects. And that's a critical idea. We're summoned to something more than we can see. Beyond nature, we'll eat of the tree of life. And so we see that the mind and still more the body receives life from him at 1,000 removes. You stop and think about this. He's made the worlds that we now call physical pleasures. And even thus filtered, they're too much for our present management. One of the things, I think there are three things that were lost at the fall. One of them was our longevity. The second one was our capacity for pleasure. And so it seems to me that was also greatly diminished as well. And the relational capacity was diminished, but ultimately it's all going to return. They're too much for our present management. So the world and its goods are too much for us. But you and I, right now, the pleasures we have 1,000 removed from God are still more than we can manage if we're not, we realize these temptations. And I marvel at how, even though it's 1,000 removes from the wellspring, it's more than we can manage. But one day, our capacity for pleasure, our capacity for enjoyment will be vastly increased. And then we taste at the fountainhead, that stream of which even those lower reaches prove so intoxicating. The whole man is to drink joy from the fountain of joy. As Augustine said, the rapture of the saved soul will flow over into the glorified body. And In the light of our present specialized and depraved appetites, we cannot imagine this voluptuous torrent. And I warn everyone seriously not to try. But it must be mentioned to drive our thoughts even more misleading, thoughts that it is saved by a mere ghost, or that the risen body lives in a numb insensibility. The body was made for the Lord, and these dismal fancies are wide of the mark. Meanwhile, the cross comes before the crown, and tomorrow is a Monday morning. A cleft has opened in the pitiless walls of the world, and we are invited to follow our great captain inside. The following him, of course, the essential point, but being so, it must be asked, what practical use is in these speculations in which I've been indulging? He says, I can think of one such use. It may be possible for each to think too much of his own potential glory hereafter. It is hardly possible for him to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature, which if you saw it now, you would strongly be tempted to worship. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? There are no mere people, no ordinary people, you see. Or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another. All friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people, and this is one of his great statements, no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. And I want you to start seeing people in that light. You see, there's a kind of a perspective that I have when I think about this idea of now knowing, from now on we recognize no one according to the flesh. Although we have known Christ according to the flesh, thus we know him thus no longer. Therefore, anyone's Christ is a new creature. So seeing people as they are going to be, beginning to see them with that light in light of eternity is what we're seeing. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization, these are immortal. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Isn't that an amazing statement? Because you recognize that there's no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. Think about them as we are no longer seeing them as they are, but as they are going to be. This doesn't mean we'll be perpetually solemn. We must play, but our merriment must be of that kind, and it is in fact the merriest kind, which exists between people who have from the outset taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption, and our charity must be a real and costly love, with deep feeling for the sins in spite of which we love the sinner. No mere tolerance or indulgence, which parodies love as flippancy parodies merriment. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. If he is your Christian neighbor, he is holy in almost the same way, for in him also Christ vere latitat, which means basically truly hidden. The glorifier and the glorified. Glory himself is truly hidden. And so it's with this thought that I want us to focus here, that it is more immortals, no ordinary people, immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. That's a perspective that forces me to see it. So every time I read this sermon, I see, and it forces me to see people in a new way, see heaven in a new way, see the desires in a new way, recognize that my true desire and aspiration is for something more than this world can provide. It's something infinite. It's something eternal. It is a person, not an it. He is a person that we are meant to know, and our glory is to actually be found in the pleasure of the capacity to be pleasing to him, and for us to be an ingredient in the divine happiness and holiness, it's ingredient in God's pleasure. And so the idea of being received by that and then responding to my neighbor is realizing that that person is a person that I'm called to serve and love. And the more I love God, the more I'm able to serve other people. And that's the main message here as well. So my desire for you is, as we sit around at the tables here, is to think about the implications of there being no ordinary people. To think about what do you long for more than anything else? And how is it going to be found? And how can we transfer our affections from the things that would hold us down in this world and to take those glories, those moments of beauty, moments of intimacy, moments of adventure as hints of greater goods that we now can only imagine that will be greater than anything that we can see. But at the end of the day, that they're pointers to something that we cannot grasp. But at the same time, it'll be a glory that we will have. So that our whole desire, all the pleasures that we've been given in this world are only hints of better goods to come. So let's focus on this little text about how you look at your neighbor. Well, there's an awful lot in this sermon, as you can now see. I tried to put it together. Any significant insight that one of you would like to share that we had? Any takeaway? What was any big takeaway that you want to have? Yes.
It's just the word immortal.
The what?
It's just the word immortal. How we view each other.
Oh, immortal, how we view each other. Yes.
Right.
Immortal beings.
Yes.
Splendors, yeah. It's to see each other as we, with the eyes of what's to come, and to see that person as good as glorified, as you know, to treat people with that dignity that they have been entrusted with by God. I just thought I'd summarize this sermon though in just 2 minutes here, maybe 3. Here's the essence, my little dots. I have 14 of these dots. 14 of these dots. You counted them. I counted the dots. And I could send it to my particular PDF of this to you through Dennis. That way you'll have my markings, you see, and that's the cheat sheet, you see. So again, he says we're half-hearted creatures filling about with all these things. We're too easily pleased, he says. He goes on to say, no dots on this page, but 2 on this one. We're meant for more than the temporal and the finite. We were meant for eternity, and we must long for more than we actually ask for. That the beauty, the most wonderful things you've ever experienced is not found in them, but they're pointers, they're hints to a better good that you have not yet seen. And that's an important thing. Otherwise, you'll fall in love with the wrong thing and break your heart. That ultimately, we have a desire, and no natural happiness will satisfy this great desire that God's granted us, because it's built into us. And so he argues instead that part of that desire, and it's an appropriate desire, is to be an ingredient in the divine happiness. That you can actually please him, whom you were meant to please, is a lovely thought. And that at the end of the day then, that expression of conferring glory, inexpressible, or shame that Jesus clearly brings out, depart from me or well done. And those are things we need to focus on. And so at the end of the day, we have this desire, but you don't want to miss out on that. And that's what true glory has to do. Because to be an ingredient in the divine happiness and pleasure, to be loved, not merely pitied, but actually delighted in, as an artist delights in the work of his work, or a father and a son. That's a burden of glory that's beyond imagination, that God would love us in that way and confer such dignity to us. Because glory, we know it means good repute or report with God, acceptance, response, acknowledgement. This door we're knocking on, you ever have these longings that you want more than you know that the world can provide? And that's a good hint of home, because we were meant to have those things, so we want to cultivate that. At the end, he says, we want to be united, though. And so I'm a lover of beauty, as you know. I'm a lover of the natural world, and to see that. But the world that God's made, though fallen, is rich in imagery and pictures of things that you just want to enter in. It's so fabulous and so wonderful sometimes that you hardly can imagine. When I see coral reefs and things like that, and you just see these things and just the exquisite pleasures of seeing that God's beauty. What will it be like? Somehow you want to enter into it, but you can't do so. But we can see in the New Testament that ultimately it's not always going to be so. We're going to get in. We will be accepted, and we're going to be summoned to pass in through nature, beyond her, into that splendor that she points to, but fitfully reflects. You see the idea? So it keeps on coming back to this longing, this desire that we have. We're going to drink joy from the fountain of joy. And at the end then realize that the way in which I see that then is to take that very desire and to realize that the highest object that's presented to my senses is another being who's an eternal being, who has also been given those same desires, and we will share that same pleasure with them and share at the Father's table, and so that we will be welcomed into that feast.
Just made me think of Psalm 16:11. In your presence is
Fullness of joy. In the right hand of pleasures forevermore. Yeah, the imagery of God's right hand is a fabulous one. If you just think about God's right hand, that he is the source, the wellspring, the fountainhead of all that is beautiful, all that is true, all that is good. And to realize that when he is being beautiful, he's being himself. When he's being true, he's himself. When he's good, he's being himself. To realize that all that I long for and see, so fitfully reflected in a fallen world, are hints of better goods that I cannot yet even name. And so the psalmist is saying that you are my source of pleasure, my source of joy. So the greatest pleasures I've known are only hints of better goods to come. I'm not ready for them, but imagine what it'll be like then when you are completely made like him. In your spirit, you already are like him, because you are a spiritual being having this earthbound embodied experience for a few decades max. And so as spiritual beings in a soul-forming world, we are spiritual, but we're also physical. And this brief sojourn in this world is to prepare us so that our souls will be perfectly in convergence as well, so that we will become in our thoughts, our desires, our aspirations, our longings, our hopes, our fears, and everything. All that will be brought perfectly into conformity with what we already are in our spirit. So you're already declared righteous, you're already holy, you're already perfect before him. There's nothing you can do to make yourself even more loved or any of that. You're perfectly secure in your spirit, but now in your soul, you're being formed and shaped so that ultimately your position, which is perfect, and your practice, which is imperfect, they'll actually conform. So there'll be a time in which you will be complete, and everything you think, you won't be able to think a thought will be not pleasing to him when all that's burned away, that dross. So imagine then your spirit, and then your soul, and then third, your body will be brought into conformity with his glory of his resurrected body so that you will see him, because that is beyond imagination. So that spirit, soul, and body complete to reflect and refract the glory of God in a way that no one else can, and that each of us is unique and will reflect that glory in a way that no one else ever can or ever will. So every one of us brings a unique thing to the table as well, this fabulous unity and diversity, and that the family of God now will be so extended that we'll go back to the first man. And so that we'll go back and we'll have a capacity of relational capacity that'll be fabulously and far beyond what we can currently imagine. It's big stuff. And it's bigger than, we set our sights on things that are so below. When we cling to this world, we constantly don't want to put off being with him. And frankly, I think that's sub-Christian. I think we should long to be with him and to depart and be with him, because that's very much better. And I think of this idea in 2 Corinthians 5, in particular, because I think about this concept as we have as our ambition, whether at home or absent, to be pleasing to him. We must all appear before this judgment seat of Christ we were talking about before. And so that knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade men, but we're being manifest as well. But his desire is if we have this earthly tent, which is our body, we have a building from God. In this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven. So while we're in this tent, we groan, being burdened. But so the idea of being encouraged, that knowing while we're at home in the body, we're absent from the Lord. We walk by faith, not by sight. We are good courage, prefer rather to be absent from the body and be at home with the Lord. So that make it our ambition, because we're going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ. See, this is a desire he has. If to live is Christ and to die is gain, then why wouldn't we want to be with him? So if anything, we should regard each day with gift as a gift and grace, and to recognize that every day we're given an opportunity to accomplish something that can have eternal consequences whatever we've done by the Spirit. So as we walk by the Spirit, as we trust in the Father, as we abide in the Son, we are accomplishing something that will endure, it will remain, and it'll be something that will matter. And every person you encounter this day can be a person that it can be a divine encounter which can have eternal consequences. And that's worthy of note, that you are here for purpose, and your life will not be lived in vain.